This week we're doing it a little bit different. Essentially, we're doing this in a Google Hangout because I wanted to share screens with you this time. So this week we're talking about your maps and gods. These two kind of go hand in hand as far as I'm concerned. Usually the gods are the ones that shape the world. That may be different to you. And that may just be mythos of the world that the gods had a hand in shaping your world, and they may in fact be distant gods that just don't participate in mortal things. Those are all kind of elements that you have to consider while thinking about your gods. I'm going to have some links inside the comments about how to draw your map, but what I wanted to show you was something that I do specifically for maps because I have a naval background. I like a feature that doesn't come up very often, and a lot of people don't really talk about it. It's called Portolans, which essentially is how you make a navigational chart. Now, the person that I'm going to link you for a basic understanding of how charts work is going to be Miss Khoury, who's going to be in the comments there. She's going to give you kind of a brief rundown of how to build your map, basically, and then you can add features as you go about it, like different font types to kind of set the mood of your world. Let me go ahead and set this up real quick here. All right, guys, let's see if you are able to see it. Okay. Unfortunately, that is not working. Well, let me take a look here. All right, I do apologize, everybody. This is my first time using Hangouts, so there's bound to be a couple minor issues here. Let's see if I can get this to come up a different way. All right, now give me just 1 second, guys. Kind of bear with me here. Thank you. All right, so just to kind of start things off, unfortunately, because of my program at school, I've been a little backed up on work that I needed to do outside of the gaming world, and so my map is a little behind right now. As I promised you guys, I'll be doing 2 maps, one for the flood season and one for the dry season. And let's see if I can get this working for you now. Okay, it looks like this is going to share correctly this time. All right, guys, here's the basic outline for my map during the dry season. If you look here, we've got the major compass in the center here, and then there's all these lines that kind of come off here. Those are what's called portolans. Those are used for navigational charting. Essentially, you judge a distance by estimation using those lines as reference. So you can look at where 2 of these points come across, like right here, and that might be a good place for me to go ahead and place a city, because that would be an important location to the world. Now, if you really like these are pretty easy to do. What I usually do is I will actually come into, got a little folder here. Let me pull it up. Okay, so there is this document that is online, and that is a quick reference of a very accurate way to do portolans, which is to set up about 16 different points in a big circle and then have the one in the center. Most cartography of the days of like D&D wouldn't have that kind of precision. So I don't use that in my maps. However, if your world does happen to have that precision, that is actually the most accurate way to set up. And it can be something that you can consider using inside your world. All right, so let me show you how to go ahead and do this. Let's open up a new document, excuse me. And just for this example, we'll use 10 inches by 10 inches. My resolution, I'm going to set to 72. Now, how this usually works, if you see my map in the background, I actually usually go 2 feet by 3 feet. That size I use because I can go to Staples and print off a poster board that is an accurate size. Now, if you're going to print, there's a couple differences here. Your resolution, you're going to want to set to 300 pixels per inch. Essentially, 300 is the highest that printers go to, and that is like photography level quality. You're going to notice that your document is much, much larger when you do that, so it's kind of an option if you would like to go about that route. 72 is usable and kind of recognized as the official resolution of most products across the internet, so those are both kind of different options for you. Now, if you are looking at printing, there's another thing that I'd like to advise you to do. If you start your document twice as large as you want, and then before you start placing labels, if you reduce its size to the size you want, it'll actually crisp up all the lines for you. And so you'll notice that like your coastlines will look a little bit cleaner, a little bit more jagged. That's totally something that you can pursue if you want. It works as well with 72 resolution, so you don't need to worry about that at all. That's kind of an advanced tip, and you can take that as you want. Just keep in mind, if you do go with that, you're going to end up with a much, much larger canvas, and it may take you longer to do it. Now, if you follow Ms. Khoury's videos, you'll basically see how I set up these islands and how these continents were developed. Just go ahead and follow her stuff for the basics of it, and then if you decide you want to go ahead and take advantage of Portolans, you can go ahead and come back here. So let's go ahead and start with our document here. Now, one of the things I like to do is I like to add a couple layers. Everything in Photoshop should always be done in layers. If you're using GIMP, you can actually do the same thing, albeit I don't use GIMP, so I'm not entirely certain where that is in the menus, but GIMP has every feature that Photoshop does have inside of it. There are some missing like names and things like that. You may find something that like instead of paintbrush, maybe it's just called brush or something like that. So it may take a little work for you to find it if you happen to be using GIMP or one of the other free programs that are out there. Now for this one, what I'm going to do is actually go ahead and go down to my Portolans because I don't want to find the document real quick here. And I'm going to steal my, my compass rose, which is right here in the center. So I want to take that and I'm going to copy it and paste it over here. Okay, maybe that didn't work. Try this again real quick. All right, there we go. So we've got our compass rose in the center. Now, if you notice, you can actually change its shape and everything like that. Keep in mind, if you change the aspect like this, it will not size correctly. So don't do it that way. If you're going to change the aspect of anything, check with the corner here. And then for Photoshop, you can hold Shift, and then that'll keep your perspective as you go up and down. If you do Shift and Alt, that'll actually keep it centered, which is actually really handy if you find a great place for it on the map, but you find out you have to shrink it down just a little bit. So let's say we like it like that. So I'm just going to drop that right there. I've got this layer, which we're actually going to just label background real quick here. And then I've got layer 2, which I'm going to rename. Excuse me. Sometimes renaming this stuff can be a little difficult, so kind of bear with me here. Forget it. It's just going to stay layer 2 because I'm not going to mess with all that. So how Portolans are done is it is best if you start with kind of 2 colors. For this example, I'm just going to use a black, and then I will also switch over to, I'm going to go with kind of more of a red here, just to kind of make my point and show you how these things work. So I'm going to quickly adjust my compass to the center a little bit more just to kind of show you. Actually, we'll go off center so I can show you how they cross. So essentially what you're going to want to do is use the line tool. Super easy way to do this is I usually start with my darker color as my primary directions, north, south, east, and west. And then I'll use my lighter color, in this case the red, for those in-between directions. Or if I want to go a little bit more technical, you'll notice there are actually quite a few spokes on this compass rose. You can attach a Portolan to any of those spokes. So if you want to go about that way, what I usually do is I kind of scan out a little bit. And the reason I do this is I make my lines much bigger than I need. So my weight, I tend to use about 2 pixels. That's kind of a thinner line. It's noticeable on the map. If you remember over here, you can clearly see where those lines are, but they don't really hamper any sort of vision inside what you're actually doing. So that's always good. So what I'll do is I'll start way up here, and then I'll just kind of drag it down, or actually, let me switch back over the line tool. I'll start way up here, and then I'll just kind of drag it down. So once I have a line on the map, that kind of gives me a great starting point. So I'll just kind of zoom in here and double check my distances. Looks like I'm a little off. So what I'll do is I'm going to set my multiply. Essentially what that's going to do is it's going to make it to where it will show things underneath it more easily. Now the other thing I'm going to do is to kind of show you what this can do. Let me change my background color. This is not going to be pretty by any stretch, but we'll go with something along the lines of kind of this orange color here. So let me dump that real quick. If you notice, that got rid of all that white inside the background. That's kind of a quick, easy edit that you can do. And you'll notice that, yeah, that's gross. Let's fix that. Let's go with something a little lighter here. That way it's less harsh. All right, so now we've got our compass rose in place. What we're going to do here is just kind of center this up on the line. And that looks pretty good right there. So the reason I said to do it this way is if we take a look, you can see that the compass rose, once I click away from this here, you'll notice that the line is actually showing underneath there, and it doesn't look inhibited and doesn't look like it's changing the aspects of the compass rose. So that's perfect. But if you actually take a look at it a lot closer, what you'll actually end up seeing happening is that it's not lining up correctly. Essentially, the line itself is superimposing over it, which is exactly why we want the compass rose to be on the topmost layer. So now that we've got that, what you can do is, I like to create a folder using this one Portolan as kind of my initial start here. So what you'll do is come up here to the menu under Layer, New, and then you can do Group from Layers. And then I will call this Portolan main. And this is going to be kind of our main one, just so I recognize where it is on the map. Now, this is super easy to do. What you're going to do is essentially duplicate the layer. It's nothing crazy, very easy to do. Once you've duplicated it, you're going to notice that you will be able to take your control tool here, and then you'll get this option to kind of torque it. When you torque it, it's going to torque it from the center of the actual line. So if you notice, my center is actually down here, which is not the center of the image. So let's go ahead and move that up. All right, now that I've got it in the center, what I'll do is I'll go ahead and start torquing that over, and we'll start with this primary point right here. I mentioned at the beginning that I was going to use off colors in between. For this example, we're actually just going to use the major lines, which is north, south, east, and west. And then we'll do the off colors for northeast, southeast, southwest, and northwest once it comes time for that. So here's our two primary lines, and let's just kind of zoom out and double check and make sure that fills up the whole thing. It does not. So this is where that Shift and Alt to even out the lines comes in, because now that we've got a line that's in the center, we want to keep that in the center, because what we can do is essentially just duplicate that line again and change its color. So let's go ahead and duplicate it, and then take a look at this. And right here is where you can change the color of it. We're going to go with a red, so let's go ahead and set that real quick here and go ahead and torque that over. Now, this is not the best way by any stretch, so now that I've got it in place just kind of roughly, I'm going to do, again, the Shift, Alt, and drag it off the map so I can make sure it's correct. And then I'm going to zoom in and make sure that my alignment on the compass rose is perfect. All right, see, this is why I said you want to make sure and scroll in, because you can clearly see that I am off. So kind of tweak that until you get just right. So here's a trick too. This is a 45-degree angle. You can actually just hold Shift and it should line you up correctly. If you notice, my compass rose is a little crooked. So what I'm going to do instead is follow the compass rose here. Again, this is the 45 point here. Well, really it goes in about 15 degrees if you hold Shift. This is where it should be if it was perfect. Again, mine is not. So what I'm going to do is kind of freely guide it in. line it right up. All right, so now I've got that one, and we like the shape that it's in, so we'll go ahead and solidify that. Then we'll make a duplicate of this one. And let's get on that real quick here. So this one has kind of a weird shape to the box because I went so large and diagonal. So let's go ahead and check to make sure we're zoomed in good. Okay. It is a little off. For this one, because of its awkward shape, what we're going to do is actually come up here and do this. We can adjust its angle right from right here. So what we can do is set that to 90, and that looks about right. So once you hit enter, that'll lock it in place, and then remember to just confirm your action. So here is a very basic cardinal direction and your mid direction compass rose. Now, if you notice, we also have these little smaller ones here. These smaller ones are just basically accent roses to kind of show where the points come together. If you're going to have multiple points on the map, I do recommend a couple accent roses because it does look more clean and professional. And then other times you should also go without those accent roses because sometimes there's just not a I'm sorry, I just realized my microphone went out. What I was saying is these accent roses here are more used to kind of be decorative. They're not necessarily specific. I do recommend that you have some of them in there if you're going to have multiple points. And sometimes you should go without those points. When you should go without those points is if you have a feature that may have one of those accent roses in the way, just go ahead and forego the accent rose. In this case, I have the major point. I've got these two minor accent roses, and then I've got these two little roses right here. And that basically sums up everything that I needed on my map. Really did this more for aesthetic reasons, the way I like the lines. Now, the easy way to do this is you've got this convenient group here. Now, let's go ahead and take one of these accent roses, and we'll just carry it over here. And again, we're going to apply the multiply to it, which will make it come out thinner. And then we'll move it thinner. That's not really a good word there. It'll make it appear to where it is clear to the viewer. So now we've got that. Now this layer should actually go up here. Again, Portolans need to be below your rows, even your accent rows. So now that you've got this one, the easiest thing you can do is actually just duplicate this group. Now you've got the whole group. You can actually just take it right down to where you need, line it up, and there you go. And if you notice, it is not actually complying with what we need. So again, just a shift and a shift and alt rather, and increase that thing so that it actually covers up the whole page. So there is a very basic 2-point Portolan map that we've done. Now, if you get a little bit more advanced, you'll notice that I used a couple more points inside mine. I use these midpoints in between as well. If you want to get really detailed, you can also use these minor points in between. There are tons of compass roses out there. I would suggest getting vector style compass roses, simply because vector ones can be scaled without losing any sort of properties or dimensions off of them. So it is very useful to have those inside your art library. Now, one of the things Miss Khoury doesn't go over is I like to have sketches or at least reference material when I draw a map. So if you look, I have these two files right here. So I found this, which was kind of a neat way of the islands being set up, and I liked it, so I kind of kept it. But if you notice, I didn't follow it religiously. That may come back when I flood the world, but for now, I like the shape that I came out with better, but that does give me kind of an initial guideline. I also have one for over here. Again, same thing. I liked a lot of the initial shape, but then I changed a lot of it to fit my needs. Now, the coasts and stuff, Miss Khoury actually just kind of tells you to go through and kind of erase and kind of razor in here, if you will. That's a good, easy way to do it. But if you find that you're getting kind of bored with that, what you can do is you can set up difference clouds by going to filter. And then if you come down to, where did it go? Render. you'll notice that there's difference clouds inside here. When you do that, it'll create a layer, or excuse me, it will render your image. So you want to make sure and do it on an empty layer. And then what'll happen is you'll end up with this layer that kind of looks like this. This one I went and set to multiply again so you could see everything underneath. And what I did is if I ever came to a point where I didn't like the way my lands looked, I just took this and I kind of moved it around and treated it like a stencil. So I came over and I was like, this coast looks a little bit weird right in here. So I'm going to line this up right. And then maybe I'll just drag out this land and drag it back in. Right now, I'm actually really comfortable and like the way my coasts are set up. So I'm not going to bother with that, but that is an idea for you. This is essentially a huge template that you can modify or move around, find something that fits you. You don't have to keep it stationary. I do recommend moving it because then you'll end up with a little bit more natural coastlines and you'll find things that kind of pull from the image and give you ideas. Now, as far as gods go, I've kind of given it some thought inside my game. My game, the gods are not going to be nearly as important. They are going to be religious figures on high that don't really interact with the players that much, other than what people see of the clerical works. Because of this, the gods may have a little bit of creation story, and I may have some sort of myth about maybe a set of twins to represent these lands right here. Or maybe star-crossed lovers and a child, something like that. But I don't want them to be the overarching gods that you sometimes see in games where they show up and they pull the players out of the fire and that sort of thing. I want a lot of the player impact to be directly player driven. Gods kind of show up as kind of being a fiat. Now I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing this. This kind of gives you an idea. And again, that's the very simplified version. That didn't save, so let me correct that real quick here. That there right there is the very simplified version. Again, you can actually detail this out and add even more lines and make it even more detailed as far as where your points are. This is just kind of another option that you can do, and a couple other points that we had talking about how to increase your map skills. One of the things I'd like to point out, Miss Khoury does make it apparent inside her videos. Keep in mind that rivers run from mountains to oceans. So when you're drawing your map, don't put your rivers kind of willy-nilly, because that'll be the first thing that people will notice, because rivers may not look correct. Now, if you have a world where things do not work that way and a player brings it up, this could be a good opportunity to kind of reward the player for noticing something different in your world. So it is entirely up to you and how you want it to go. One of the things to keep in mind as well is on flat land, rivers can do kind of odd things. The Amazon River is kind of a good example of rivers doing weird things. If you look at it, it kind of winds into itself and spreads back out quite a bit. The Yangtze River in China is another good example of that. Basically, any sort of geographic features that you want to add, I would recommend looking at an atlas and comparing your map to real-world examples, because that will help strengthen the immersion factor that you get from this map. I use the same brushes that Miss Khoury does during her videos that basically show the mountains in kind of an inked style. I think it fits for the game. It makes it feel like maybe this is something that somebody lovingly crafted. Another option that you can have is you can start with a smaller region. Like, let's say we just want to highlight this region right here. And that's where the players are going to start. And because my world floods, this would be during the dry season. But I don't give them a map. I just kind of give them a general outline of this, and I leave the map basically open. I could let a player go ahead and draw that if his character's interested in cartography. If you do an exploration game, that actually works to be a good advantage and good tool for you as the GM, is to allow your players to go ahead and draw their own maps. They may actually be able to sell those maps on like the black market or even to traders and things like that. So there's plenty of RP opportunities if you decide to go that route. Let me go ahead and stop sharing this real quick here. All right, guys, we're back. Let me just make a quick correction of my screen. All right, so in a nutshell, just take some time on your map, because your map is going to be that primary reference tool. And if you're like me, you may actually end up printing that off. You can't see it in the frame here, but I do have a a 2 foot by 3 foot map that I use for Legend of the Five Rings because I love that game. And I think having the map at the table is actually really beneficial because players can kind of stop for a second and look where they are and figure out, estimate their own distances once they learn how to judge the distance on the map. A lot of the times I'll include a key on the map, giving a sense of scale. I do recommend that as well. Another thing that you can do that I did with my last map is I actually designated the regions by who was in ownership of those lands. So I had family crests on the map to signify who owned those lands. That's actually kind of a neat aspect that I picked up from Cartographers Guild, which is a website where a lot of people get together and do maps. If you have any questions or want to just have your map picked over by experts, that's kind of the place to go. Now, let's go back to gods for a second here. If you have not seen it, Samwise 7 does a great series where he adds a bunch of domains that that Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition kind of left off. A lot of them are actually very interesting because it allows you to create gods that are a little bit more niche than what 5th edition originally came out with. Because if you look at 5th edition, there's very limited amount of domains that a cleric can select from when he's creating his character. But if you start combining those domains in kind of odd ways, you'll get some interesting characters. One of the gods that I'm thinking about for this world is a god that is a dragon made of nature, essentially, is how he looks. Essentially, it's a dragon made of like thorns and twisted vines and such. If you've ever seen the movie Origin, there's a dragon fey beast inside there. That's kind of what I'm thinking about. But instead of having nature and life, which is kind of the norm, I wanted to go with nature and death. It's a god of cycle. So this god created things like the blights in my world. So like blights are these terrible things that basically vampire plants is kind of the best way to explain them. They're in the monster manual for 5th edition. If you get a chance to check those out, they're kind of an interesting low-level monster. But I really liked them, so I decided I wanted to have a god that these plant vampire things venerate, and so I decided to create this god that was a god of death and of nature. So as they go and they kill, they're killing and sacrificing in that god's name. Yet they do things like they'll go and plant things where they've conquered a city. So let's say the blights take over a village. That village would be run over, but there would be plants all over the place, and you'd find dead bodies that were dried husks. Just kind of an interesting, like a dark mood whenever that god is encountered. How a player may take that is, let's say we have a druid who's interested in this god. The druid may choose to just venerate the nature side and the life-giving side. However, they may decide that they want to be a blighting druid, kind of like from Dark Sun, and focus on that death side. Or even take it to an even more extreme and say that nature needs to rule over man again and be completely against civilized society. There's a whole lot of different options, and I do recommend kind of looking at non-traditional gods. In the back of the player's handbook, there is a good selection of gods that you can start with if you're not comfortable with creating your own. In the comments, I will link Miss Khoury's stuff and Samwise 7's video on the different domains, but it's really in his blog where he's got it all written down. I would recommend taking a look at it. The domains haven't received a whole lot of play tests, so kind of keep that in mind if you decide to use them in your campaigns. I used it my last one, and I didn't have any clerics, so I didn't get to find out if those domains were necessarily overpowered or underpowered or whatever they may be. If you do happen to find out some good information for him, please let Samwise 7 know on any of his videos about his different domains or anything like that. All right, guys, thanks for kind of sticking with me. This one's been a little rough because it's my first time with Hangout, so I appreciate that. Next week, we'll probably be back to pre-recorded just because it's a little easier for me. As far as next week goes, I'm going to have the maps finalized for you. And then we'll also kind of talk about regions and governments. Basically, the map that I'm originally going to produce is going to be basically land features, and then I'm going to start looking at that map for inspiration for governments. So for you guys at home that are kind of following along with the series, that's kind of your next thing as well, is finalize your maps, be ready for this idea of going into creating civilizations. And if you have something really unique or interesting that you want to explore, just kind of mark it down on your map or on a piece of paper with your map. That way we can come back to it next week. All right, guys, thanks for hanging out with me, and I'll see you at the table.